And on this side of the Atlantic, European Union leaders are meeting in Copenhagen for informal talks on how to better defend Europe. Heads of state and government from EU member nations highlighting the urgency of countering hybrid attacks by Russia. It comes after a series of incursions into European airspace and a string of drone sightings at EU airports suspected of being instigated and controlled by Moscow. Proposals on the table include building a common drone defense and boosting aid to Ukraine for its defense against Russia's invasion. And our correspondent Jack Parrock, he is following events for us in Copenhagen. Jack, there is a discussion about putting together a collective defense system against drones. What would that look like? Can you tell us?
Yeah, this is what they're trying to work out at the moment. The European Commission has put forward a proposal for a number of different security issues. One thing we know that the leaders have been discussing is to have more regular EU defence ministerial meetings. That sounds a bit boring, and probably to a lot of people it is, but what it means is that they're going to talk more in the European Union about defence and consistently. One of the other things that they are looking into is the suggestion of a drone wall. This was put forward by the European Commission. Countries on the eastern flank, the Latvian leader on the way into these meetings said we could put together this drone wall within a year. Let me tell you what the European Commission put forward as a proposal. They said it will be designed as a multi-layered, deep zone of technologically advanced systems with interoperable anti-drone capabilities for detection. Sounds like a lot of EU speak, and it is. The translation is they don't quite know what they can do with this. We've already heard the German defense minister say that he doesn't think it's a particularly operable thing, but that they need to try and do something. As you say, massive airport closures, incursions into many eastern flank countries by drones, and they're very concerned. Have a listen to what the French president, Emmanuel Macron, had to say here today.
In any case, we're in confrontation with Russia, who for several years have been a very aggressive player in the information sphere, as we have seen in the context of elections and elsewhere, who are stepping up their cyber attacks, who have obviously launched a war of aggression in Ukraine, who are using the nuclear threat, and who today, as we can clearly see, are provoking incidents in airspace. All of this is a set of actions that fall within the realm of confrontation.
Jack, I also want to ask you about these discussions about changing the European Union's rules on how to get new members in, notably Ukraine. How likely is that to happen?
Yeah, this is a sort of extra discussion that's been put forward by the EU Council President, Antonio Costa, who is the chair of these meetings. This is something that is very politically delicate, and we've heard, for instance, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban say he's not in favour of it. At the moment, if a country wants to be able to be an EU member country, they have to get all the other 27 to agree. It needs a unanimous support for that country to come in. Ukraine is being blocked, or would be blocked, by the Hungarians and potentially others. And what they want to do is to end that unanimity requirement for a new country to become a member. That's what the council president is pushing for. It's quite complicated, and it looks like, frankly, a non-starter. But that is something that they're putting forward. And we know that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky joined this meeting via video link. And lots of the EU candidate countries, they will be in Copenhagen tomorrow as well for further meetings with the EU leaders. And they will want to discuss this.
And this is not only about Ukraine, is it, Jack? I mean, there are other countries that are knocking on the EU's door.
Yep, Albania, North Macedonia, they're desperately keen to join. There are a lot of countries in the Western Balkans that feel that the EU has really dragged its feet in this process, and lots of them feel that it's because of that veto. The idea of changing the veto system, though, would require all the countries to let go of their veto. It would need a unanimous decision to change the system, so it's very sort of complex and unlikely to really happen.
Our correspondent Jack Parrock with the latest from that summit in Copenhagen. Jack, thank you. All right, I want to go now to our chief political editor, Michaela Kuefner. She is traveling with the German Chancellor for the duration of this summit. Michaela, why did it take EU leaders this long to push for stronger joint defense?
Well, they still claim that they are moving in European lightning speed, but today they took hours longer than initially scheduled and almost decided to skip the family photograph to demonstrate that unity that they want to project towards Moscow, because they had so much to talk about. In terms of concrete outcome at this informal meeting, not that terribly much was expected, but I am hearing from people close to those talks today that the Europeans want to unite behind something called the drone wall of defense, also a force spotting drones that could enter European Union territory. But what that means in detail, nobody is able to tell me right now, because a lot of this is symbolism, and a lot of this, some argue, also potentially infringes on the very job that NATO is doing, because all European countries belong to NATO, that defense alliance as well. But what's becoming quite clear is that the Europeans are pretty spooked, pretty alarmed, and pretty determined to counter what is perceived to be a hybrid threat by Russia, which Russia appears to be gearing up. And the latest indication of that is that France has boarded a ship believed to belong to the Russian Shadow Fleet, and it is suspected of potentially having been a launch pad for those drones spotted above Denmark, where I'm standing right now, but those haven't been conclusively traced to Russia yet.
You know, earlier this week, Michaela, we heard from the German defense minister. He said that a drone wall is something that we can't even expect for another 4 or 5, maybe even more years. With that in mind, are we looking at real steps towards a collective EU defense strategy here, or is this just more talk?
There definitely are signs of a collective European defence strategy, but this is the European Union and it's a question of capacity. A lot of capacity is tied up in NATO, but then of course also money, and some EU members are looking at the way the EU responded to the corona crisis, which was the first time that common debt was taken up. That's something Germany is completely set against, Germany being the country with probably the most cash it's able to put on the table after that debt break was raised, particularly for defense issues. So a lot of spotlight on the Germans here, not willing to go down that road. At the same time, pretty much everyone determined to move in lightning speed. We could see a decision on those frozen assets by Russia as early as the end of October, when the next formal EU meeting is set to take place. And we're clearly seeing movement on procurement and actually the hardware of the Europeans getting their act together to throw together their capabilities and produce drones, but also other defense capabilities much faster than anyone could have believed just a couple of years ago.
Wow. I know that leaders have been talking also about sustaining support for Ukraine. What can the EU do to make sure that this support lasts beyond the short term?
Well, an additional 4 billion, Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, is eager to stress is heading towards Ukraine's way. But the last thing highly indebted EU countries need is a long-term burden on their budgets. Many of them, of course, also domestically under pressure. There's right-wing populism as well. There's questions being asked why so much money is flowing towards Ukraine. And that's why tapping into the potential of those frozen assets is so key. But Belgium is set against this. That's where these assets are being held, because it fears having some kind of court ruling where it might have to pay up. So the whole question of who would pay for what is being discussed also here in Copenhagen. And there's the question of how fast and whether the Ukraine could join the European Union. And here Hungary wants to put in a veto. Here we're seeing the European Union moving towards a qualified majority to make sure that individual potentially Russia-leaning voices can't block the whole process. That would be meaningful support for Ukraine as well.
All right, our chief political editor, Michaela Kuefner, traveling with the German Chancellor tonight in Copenhagen. Michaela, thank you.